Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, has the time for telemedicine arrived? One of our experts, Dr. Karen Rizzo, she heads the Pennsylvania Medical Society. She's going to weigh in on that. That's a wonderful topic to talk about. But first, what would a program on this weekend be without discussing the embattled Kathleen Kane, the Attorney General of this state? She just has put forward a defense. All of that and more follows these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, welcome to the program. Well, joining me to get into a discussion of what I think was one of the most interesting, fascinating, and unusual press statements this past week in terms of her defense. I've never seen anything quite like this, is Brad Bumsted with the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review and Mary Wilson with Pennsylvania Public Radio. They were both at the Attorney General's press conference. Brad, I'll start with you. You've written a book about this. We've talked about that. This was a very unusual defense that she put forward, not directly at all discussing the charges that she leaked grand jury information, lied to a grand jury, tried to cover it up. I think I got that right. Have you ever, first of all, tell the folks out there, what was the defense that she put forward?
Well, first of all, it wasn't a press conference per se because she didn't take any questions. We were told beforehand that she would, and then she didn't. So she made a statement. And this statement had to do with the fact that she says that pornography that was traded back and forth among former prosecutors under previous attorney generals and some under her regime was the root of all of this, and that is really what's going on and people need to look at it. What she said was she is the only one with legal standing to challenge a protective order that still prevents release of some of these pornographic emails, some of which she called them filthy, disgusting.
Racist, too? Didn't
yeah, there's some
racial overtones,
right, they
religious bigotry. Yeah.
But here's the thing. A number of attorneys that I talked to afterwards said, even if every single email is released, what's that have to do with what she's charged with in Montgomery County of perjury and obstruction of justice and official oppression? Yeah. She didn't tie that together, although it could be, if she does go to a jury trial, the opening for her attorney to try to appeal to people to say, look.
It sounds awful lot like, Mary, that she was alleging that there's a conspiracy. In other words, if those emails come out, look how many, and you covered this, careers were destroyed with the initial release, right? 8 names, and then there were additional names, I think, that were released as a result of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court said, anybody in the judicial system, I want their names. Governor Corbett asked for the names, and we had a couple of fire.
There was a show and tell. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, this was a kind of a piece of unfinished business from last year, and that's kind of tied to this whole web of events that lead us to this point. Yeah. And Kane, dredged it up again, says it's part of the story, and as Brad says, it may be part of the story, but it's not necessarily part of her defense. Again, she didn't directly address the allegations that she leaked secret information and lied about it under oath.
Yeah. I mean, here's the part of it that I have trouble understanding. The person involved in making the decision to prosecute the Attorney General is the District Attorney of Montgomery County, Risa Furman, not anyone who was in the AG's office. And there were some other people who were involved in that email circulation. For example, Seamus McCaffrey on the Supreme Court, even though he used his own server, I guess he used his own email on his own server. And then there were some other people outside of the AG's office. But what does that have to do with Risa Furman and the investigation that took place in Montgomery County? Well,
if she were here, Kane, she would say that it would never have gotten to Risa Furman if it hadn't been going through the statewide grand jury, the root of which was reported to the statewide grand jury by people she says were involved in the porn chain. That's how it got there. But look, I have to tell you about the emails. I made numerous requests under the Right to Know law for all of the emails of former and current employees of the Attorney General's office. I emailed and right-to-know requested her office. And I was turned down repeatedly on those. I won one case through a hearing officer in her office, and the Attorney General opposed it in Commonwealth Court. We bowed out at that point legally, but they opposed the Inquirer's case too, which I believe is still.
So what you're basically saying is that you requested information that she had that she could have given you, but didn't.
Well, she would say that she couldn't give all of it to us.
Because it was covered by the...
Right, and I understand that, but nonetheless, she could drop her challenge to the Inquirer's case if it's providing that's still standing.
All right, let's go. Oh, please.
The other thing about this protective order, this request that she made of the judge, we were given no evidence that she's made a formal legal filing. That's something that you would have to request, I believe, in court, based on what I was told. And the other thing is that the protective order, at least, the one we know about for the grand jury that was investigating her, it is involved in the very charges that are against her. So some of the charges against her and against a special agent who was also her driver, a protective order on the grand jury that ostensibly was meant to stop the intimidation of Office of Attorney General employees and stop retaliation against employees. And the prosecutors who charged Kane and her driver alleged that she continued and he continued to do that in spite of the protective order. Yep. So she would be calling for the lifting of a protective order that would almost invalidate some of the charges against her.
All right, we're going to run to a break. Maybe if Brad wants to respond. What happens here? Does she resign? Does she lose, in effect, gets her law license suspended and therefore can't serve? Does the House impeach her? All of these things are still somewhat up in the air. We'll get to that and some other issues after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, welcome back to the program. I'm chatting with Mary Wilson and Brad Bumsted, two of the state's leading reporters. They've been covering Kathleen Kane since she was elected Attorney General, involved in a number of aspects of her career. All right, Mary, I'll start with you, and then we'll get to Brad. Think about the possibilities here. A trial, maybe, someday. Resignation, which she says no. Impeachment, which House leaders have not ruled out of the question.
Correct.
And losing a law license. Now, how many different options? Which one do you want to pick and chat about a bit?
Well, I think the one that's on the shortest timetable is the law license. So that would take the least amount of time to just take a complaint and hear it and give Kane time to defend herself. She doesn't, so those proceedings, so we already know of one complaint that's been filed before the Supreme Court Disciplinary Board. Kane would have 10 days to respond to that. We wouldn't know either way from the court itself what the determination was, unless it was nay, she loses her license. And so that could happen within a month even. Yeah. And, there could be many complaints that have already been filed for her law license to be looked at.
You can't rule that out, can you?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about it. Yeah. That much is very clear.
Terry, there doesn't even have to be a complaint.
They
can use the complaint.
But they have a complaint.
Yes, and they can use that. Right. But the chief counsel of the disciplinary board and one member of the board can file papers with the Supreme Court. And what this is about is suspension, not removing her law license.
That's exactly.
And it's so the suspension could take place, and she has 10 days to respond to it. That's true. That can happen fast. The impeachment, the legislature's usually been reluctant to do that until there's a conviction, but nonetheless, I've been talking to people who say that they are, exploring that and starting to move forward on looking at the procedures.
given the number of Democrats, including the governor of the state, the Auditor General of the state, probably the two highest, I think you would agree, highest ranking elected Democrats.
And the House Minority Leader.
And the House Minority Leader. And, well, we have the Lieutenant Governor in there, a high-ranking official, too. I don't know what he said on it, but these others have said she should resign. What did Democrats do if Republicans move an impeachment bill since they want her to resign, and in effect impeachment and removal, conviction of the charges in the Senate would automatically cause her to be removed from, well, she could be removed from office. That's all it would happen. It's not criminal. Why doesn't it have the same effect as a resignation? She's out of the job. Right? But you all think, both of you think that's not likely at the moment.
The only thing, the only thing I've been told, as far as that goes, is that it's such a lengthy process, and that I've been told that Republicans really can't lift it on their own. You need this to be a bipartisan.
But they need a two-thirds.
Two-thirds in the Senate to convict, and they would need Democrats.
Right. But I think there are Democrats, given Wolf's leadership, who may be willing to go there. But this would take some time for this to transpire.
And it would be a huge black eye.
But the one thing that does take place with an impeachment, as happened with former Justice Rolf Larson, is once that happens, you can never hold that office again.
Or any office, I think.
Or I guess.
Office of trust, whatever, All right, let's go to one other thing. She did not address this, and I've been listening very carefully, trying to find Mary's leaning forward. She didn't say again yesterday that she would or would not seek re-election. Now, facing certain Democratic opposition in the primary from an opponent, and the most mentioned name is the Montgomery County Commissioner Josh Shapiro. Have you heard anything about that, either one of you? Mary.
Whether or not she'll run?
She'll run.
For sure, no. I'm bowing out.
But isn't that a fascinating question? She said before, but she didn't say yesterday while she was intimating, I'm not resigning.
That's true, but how many times do you have to say it? I mean, she has said it repeatedly since January.
Yeah, but she said repeatedly that she wouldn't resign, and all last week, that's all we heard, that she's not resigning.
It's a great point.
I'm just making it.
It's a great point. that it did not happen. Yes, she did not say that. Has it changed? Who knows?
Final question. Do any of you believe, do you believe or not believe that the Democratic Party is going to have somebody else run against her in the primary? Does anybody believe they want to go through all this debate during the course of an important election next year? You think the Democrats will find a candidate? Will they find a candidate and file in the primary against her? Or don't we know yet?
I think the only indication there is that so many Democrats have called for her to leave. And I don't, if Josh Shapiro, one of the right-hand men of the governor, is suggesting that he's interested, how do you not?
We're out of time. All right, I'll tell you, I'm really interested and fascinated by this whole subject of telemedicine. We're going to get into that with Dr. Karen Rizzo after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Well, Dr. Karen Rizzo, she's the president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society, joins me. Dr. Rizzo, this is a great topic. I'm glad you're in to talk about it. And we're talking about telemedicine. I almost said telemarketing. Telemedicine, it may be the wave of the future. There are pros and cons to it. I'm glad you're here because you're going to talk about both, right?
Correct.
Now, I live in Tioga County. I don't have a dermatologist anywhere near with 500 miles. I have a mole. I take a picture of it. I send it to a physician. Is that kind of one way that
That's
or
certainly
is that a silly example?
No, that's a great example, and it highlights a problem that exists in our state and throughout the country. That for certain specialties, there are barriers to access to care. And that's really what the Pennsylvania Medical Society and organized medicine is so excited about with telemedicine, and the way the technology is starting to improve and really become very, very helpful in communicating information, from a medical perspective about patients. And certainly in our state, Terry, where there's a lot of rural areas, there are problems with access to care. There's barriers, whether it's geography, distance, weather, or the availability of specialties. So this is an opportunity, a technology that clearly has value.
But it's one we have. I'm going to get into some of this. So there are truly benefits from. Let's stay on the benefits, and then we're going to talk about, some possible problems that need to be dealt with before this can become kind of standard. I don't know. First of all, how much of this is being done now?
Well, it's at its infancy because the technology continues to improve every year. But I think a lot of the telecommunications companies are all over it. They see an opportunity, they see a need, so there's great motivation to improve the technology. And where we come in as the Pennsylvania Medical Society, we anticipate this and we welcome its use, but we want to make sure there's appropriate standards and safeguards to ensure that a high quality and patient safety are protected in using this technology.
What's fascinating now is that, for example, I can communicate with my doctor through, particular hospital's website, where they get on, and and that's really been fabulous for me. Because if I have a question or something, he can get right back to me. I don't have to, I'll go through 4 other people, and he can do it at his leisure. So, the way we're using technology, and I get all the reports, when I go in to get my blood work done, I'm sure lots of our viewers are going through the same thing. I can look at them, and then I'm better informed when I go in as a patient to know what questions to ask.
Right. And that's what it's about, communicating effectively and educating the patient. So what PA Med did was put together a task force, and they had input from a lot of specialty societies, state and national organizations. And we're in the process, and it's almost complete, of drafting legislation that we're going to present to our Pennsylvania legislature, as hopefully that will be well received and serve as a set of safeguards and guidelines in managing this technology. And there's a few tenets, a few principles that we think are very important to protect. One has to do with licensure. If the patient is in Pennsylvania, we want to make sure that the physician providing the care also has a Pennsylvania license. And that can also be mid-levels as well. And with that licensure requirement also comes the liability protection coverage as well. We want to make sure that the standard of the interaction, that the medical record that reflects what's happening is accurate and documented the right way. So there should be a history, there should be a physical, a diagnosis, and a treatment plan with recommendations.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to run to a break. When we come, one question that, can you do this? I think I'll wait for your answer. I'll just pose this as we go to this break. Can, in fact, doctors do it now? Can they use some, as I said, could I send a photograph to my picture to my doctor, and he could, begin to, deal with it that way as opposed to me going in to see him? I got a bunch of other questions for Dr. Rizzo. We'll get back to them in a minute.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Well, I'm talking with Dr. Karen Rizzo from the Pennsylvania Medical Society. We're chatting about telemedicine. It looks like it's more and more of it will be employed in a whole variety of ways. Doctor, I want to, we were talking about something at the break called medical records, and, these are records that get kept. Who keeps them? What kind of privacy? That's another issue here, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that's an important concept to remember, that this is going to be another way to take care of patients. So you want to make sure you have quality standards in place, patient safety, that confidentiality is protected. And also, if it's going to be telemedicine, you want the video as well as the auditory virtual interface occurring.
Yeah. So let's look. One other aspect of this is I might, as I started out by saying I got a mole. I'm just using this as illustrative. I take a photograph of it. I send it. Doctor might say, okay, blah blah blah. This is what I want to do, but that doesn't preclude then further, going on site. This can often just be a preliminary step, right?
Absolutely, and it can really help the patient and the doctor determine if something is important that needs to be seen sooner versus later. Now, the other component to this, Terry, is also the fact that we want to make sure that this is perceived as the practice of medicine, because it certainly appears to be, just in another way. And that third-party payers, Medicaid, Medicare, have to acknowledge that and compensate for it as well.
A lot of our viewers who are patients, that's the first question they're going to ask, will the insurance cover? So this is actually a little more complicated than it seems. It has a lot of moving parts. So you're going to introduce the legislation, and is there any sense about whether there's any interest yet? I would think lawmakers would be very interested in this subject.
Absolutely, because the benefits are extreme. And in our state, where there's access to care issues, especially in rural and underserved areas, for various reasons, geography, being one of them, and as well as the potential for decreased access to certain specialists that exist, this is a tremendous opportunity to improve that reach.
Yeah, and that's something. And the other thing is that, with the doctor shortage, even in areas where, you're proximate to a physician, you might get told, well, I can see you in a month. Nothing, just because there's so many patients trying to see so many physicians. This might be a way to at least start a process that would, ultimately lead perhaps to a visit, but you can at least get an initial diagnosis or some,
Right, and if there was concern that something significant was happening, you would move up that, you would, prioritize that visit.
Yeah. So we're less than a minute left. When is this legislation? Do you have a time frame on it?
It's close to being completed, so I would anticipate hopefully in the next month.
Okay. Well, one of the things I hope you will do is, as this moves through the legislature, I hope you'll come back and bring us updates, and it's undoubtedly going to, the legislature, it'll get tweaked and modified, right, in some fashion? Probably,
but I think the basic principles, that we encourage to have adopted are there.
Thanks. Wonderful update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.